Hello, hello, calling the world. Where is everybody? Um, what I want to talk about today, and I'll get started before anybody comes, is the what goes on when a really good watch is made. Uh, what what does it take, and what are the rules, and what what is everything involved? So that's what I want to talk about today, and so let's get started. Now, the first thing I want to sort of recognize, I guess, is one of the organizations. Hi, Graham. How you doing? I know who you are now. Um, some of the guys, I guess, today, in fact, maybe a lot of them, for all I know, are going to. Uh, they've been through part of it, and in looking, I think in going through the process in creating a new watch, uh, what we have come out with is something that we found was in a lot of ways very surprising. A lot of watch collectors talk in very simple terms. Hey, Thomas, they talk about in-house or not in-house and things like that. And to some extent, that makes sense. To some extent, it doesn't, though. And I think about the only there are secrets. I mean, there's so many secrets going on. It's very difficult to explain it in a way that doesn't sound like chicanery is at work, but it's not. So let me start with one thing. If you're familiar with Parmigiani, you may or may not know that the Sandoz Family Foundation owns Parmigiani. They own the company that makes the movement for them called Vaucher. They own the company that makes the hairsprings called Autoculpa. They own the company that makes the cases, and they own all of these different things. Now, the the thing that's interesting about that is, hi Jonathan. The thing that's interesting about that is the fact that when somebody sees a Parmigiani and they say, well, somebody else makes their movement. Well, they're all part of a system, a vertical system, where the different parts are made. But beyond that, the I mean, when we look at Vasseur, we also know, hey, Flip and Zippo, we also know that the movement that are designed to some extent, but made by Vasseur, are also purchased and used in other watches. Some of whom uh, tell us what it is. All right, so that's one thing. Now going on further, there's a company, again, one of the ones that's owned by the Sandoz Family Foundation, that makes the little gears and all these other little parts. Well, most companies, the ones that will make specialized movements or movements in general or watches in general, will be the parts. They don't sit come and make them all. I know that Rolex has its own foundry, and I think they make a lot of their own things, but there are a lot of other things that they don't make, but they don't talk about. Hey, Mark, and in a way, it's sort of like silly, because one way to look at this is that in an almost commonsensical way, is that if you have a watch company, you would want all of the parts that are made by people who specialize in that and who are very good at it. And if you go way back when, uh, you there were they have people all over the place, and what a watch company was, they simply order the different parts from all of these places and put them together. Um, I think assemblage was pretty much a term that was used. Hey, Mark, happy Father's Day to you too. Um, so I I think that to understand this, you there's far more to it than even that. Okay, so if you have another part of it that you have is that you have people doing all of these specialized jobs. Some people do the guilloche, some people do the finishing, and they specialize in all these things. Now, why is that important, and why is that does that make economic sense? The Let's take finishing for example. You can make a pretty standard movement, and you may have a client or you may have a reason for the type of watch you're making to have better finishing, but you can't have somebody around who's a finisher with nothing to do until you get to that point. So it makes sense to say, okay, well, we're gonna need this amount of finishing or this type of finishing, so we'll have these people come in and do it. Thomas, see, don't most high-end independent watches make their own parts? No, don't think they do. They can't. It 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 would be very difficult to afford. This is what I'm saying, Thomas, is that I was very surprised by what we found. And in a way, all of us who have been involved in these projects are under sort of a gentleman's understanding, okay, to keep our mouth shut about certain things. And but in a way, it's sort of like it's not that big of a deal, except it would embarrass companies to admit what they're doing is using specialized parts from all over Switzerland. Some of them uh, get cheap parts outside of Switzerland, and so this becomes that's a whole other issue, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about really good parts, better than they could make, let's say, in house, so to speak. And so it wouldn't make sense for them to do it. Hey, Zippo, I think it's okay with a company doing a good job with the nuts and bolts and leaving the design to someone else. Yeah, I think, if yeah, I think that you have certain things that have to be done. You have a designer. In fact, you have at least two designers. One kind of designer designs a movement. Now, if you're using the same movement over and over again, you sort of have a one-shot thing. And so, the watch designer would be called the watchmaker. But in fact, the watchmaker may be doing very little except making modifications on some kind of base design. Probably the most well-known aspect of that is with ETA movements. And somebody earlier today or the other day had written a comment on a video and said, "Well, IWC, what did they say? They do all of these things to their to the ETA movements that they get, and they use from a base of an ETA, and they say it's totally new and it's totally different, and that's how come they don't tell you it has an ETA base. Well, if it's so good, why not say, well, this is what we've done? And I think there's sort of like, why can't they just say something like, look, we use the best parts, the best movements, the best things so that we can get it to you at a good price. We have designers, we have watchmakers, we've got all of these different people working, but we also have parts that we get that are better than we could or would make sense to do here. Something to that effect. But it's gotten to the point now where, excuse me, the prices are so high that people somehow think that if if somebody is good at one thing, they'll be good at everything, and that's just not true. It's sort of like having somebody who's really a good writer and have them do the illustrations, book illustration. You know, somebody does a book with illustrations, one person does the writing, somebody else does the illustrations. Now, they may work for the same company, but then you start adding all of the different parts that go into a watch, and it begins to make less and less sense to have fairly standard parts. See, one of the things, for example, where you have like the gearing, okay, with a certain frequency, you're going to have so many teeth in a gear for a certain size. And for a gear train, you're going to have hour, minutes, and seconds, and they have different gearing for each one of those. And so, if you take the same gear set roughly, and you can make two different movements by two different companies, and no one would be the wiser. More commonly, what happens is they'll take some kind of base, very typically an ETA base, and they'll fix it up and transform it into something else. That's why the same base is used on so many movements. You look at Rolex, in fact, Rolex uses a lot of the same movement itself. The Air King used to have the same movement as the Milgauss, but for some reason they decided, well, let's not do that. We're going to give the Air King a different movement, and the one that they gave it was the one that's using with a perpetual oyster. I think it's the Oyster Perpetual. I forgot what their entry level watch is called. But the thing of it is that I think if we look at what all of the different elements, then we're looking at beginning to understand it. I've been working on this watch for, God, I tell you, it must be over a year on one watch. I decided I was going to change from getting something like an ETA 6498, and because I could get a case that would fit the 6498, I could get a dial that would fit that, I could get the hands, everything go together, and bip 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 bip, and voila, I have a watch. Well, I thought, well, I'm gonna get fancy, and I've been there are some skills required, and so I'm trying to get a screw in or something like that. The thing takes off into the black hole of screws and parts that you lose making a watch. And so it can be, especially when you have no talent. This is what pretentious watchmakers is about. We're trying a bunch of no talent watchmakers trying to make watches, which is sort of fun, though, really. Okay, so I've been blabbing on and on and on. Let me see what you have to say. Um, let's see. Javi, hi, Javi, Tim. Okay, Tim got his FPJ. That's so cool. Hi, Bill. Hi, Bill A. Bill A is a guy. He's a watchmaker, a pretentious watch. Well, Bill's not a pretentious watchmaker. I am. He's made a lot of watches. Um, okay, let's see. Thomas, I saw a few videos on uh, Halter in his workshop. He was making almost all of his own parts on different machines and has a special CNC machine he customized. Yeah, you can have things like that too. Here's the thing. If you take a look at the price of Halter's watches, there's two things that stand out. One, they're very expensive, and yes, they're very good, and there are very few of them. And so you can do that. There's another guy, a guy in France who makes these wonderful watches. They're key wound watches, and he may make everything from it. And the number of parts he has, though, seems to be a lot less. But let's say, for example, well, let me think. I think Marco Lang was even modifying the jewels that were used. These are man-made jewels, but he was modifying them or made them himself or something like that. And yeah, you have that with that's a very rare kind of thing, but you do have people doing that. I'm not saying it's impossible, but when you look at the prices of those things, they're out of reach for all but a few. Now, if you have a company with a payroll and you got to have X number, X amount of money coming in to to take care of all of the things you have to pay for, and then someone says, well, if we had a little thing that started making gears, for example, instead of buying gears from somebody else, which most of them do, the it wouldn't be worth it. In other words, the gears would not be any better, and it would cost us a lot more than doing it if we did it on our own. And it's just it's not like making something cheesy. I mean, that can happen. I'm not saying that somebody, can't go to Slobovia and get some cheap parts or something. That happens. This is why the Swiss are very strict about being able to say made in Switzerland. And so everything's got to be, or at least a certain percentage of it. Okay, let's see. Hairsprings are typically outsourced. Yes, Tim's right. And there have they the there are very few companies that make good ones. I don't know where FP Jorn gets his hairsprings. I would like to find out. Um, I do know that my FP Jorn Chronometr vein loves to get magnetized, so I'm assuming that he has one of the hairsprings made out of transitional metals. On the other hand, you have companies like with Precision Engineering, which is part of H. Moser, and they make a hairspring called the Strawman hairspring. And all kinds of companies are using that hairspring, but they're not telling anyone. They don't get magnetized. Neither one of my H. Mosers ever been magnetized. But it's like that because I know they have that hairspring. The only company that I know that has a Straussman hairspring outside of H. Moser is MB&F, and that's because they say so. I was talking to Malin, who's the head of H. Moser, about that in an interview, and he's just not going to tell you. I mean, it's sort of like it's almost like it's none of your business. It's a good hairspring. So what if some company that uh, Joe Blow's watches or something like that? It's just basically it's almost like it's almost like childish to insist that they tell you where it comes from, which is too bad in my opinion. I would much rather see a watch industry where they know everything that you get, but rarely do you. Okay, let's see what else is going on here. Um, okay, you give Marco Lang a lot of respect. Could you state us why he is so? Oh, why I think a lot of them. If you, I mean, like Thomas mentioned, being the holders thing, it's a very, very interesting route that Marco Lang came from. His father, Rolf Lang, and his grandfather, they go through a whole series of watchmakers. And what happened at the end of World War II, Rolf Lang, his father, was born in 1948. And at the time, Dresden, that part of Germany, was under uh, sort of a very conservative version of communism that it was Stalinist, really, uh, at that time. And so they would not allow somebody who was the son or daughter of a watchmaker become a watchmaker because that gave them an unfair advantage and sort of this equal. equal kind of thing. Okay, so what his father ended up doing, since he couldn't be a watchmaker, he ended up doing the restoration of the it's like the mechanical museum in Dresden that got bombed pretty badly at the end of the war. So, but he sort of was able to finally get his way back into watchmaking. But growing up, Marco Lang, his son, was had this not only sort of a formal education and watchmaking school, but he also had another kind of sort of a meta understanding of of small technology, if you will, from all of these mechanical things that they were putting back together in the bombed out Dresden museum. And plus, he has this incredible amount of integrity. This is, I think, some of the best watchmakers go broke or get pushed out of their company because they're so uncompromising and they're terrible businessmen. So there are a few exceptions. Kari Voutilainen is good at both. So is F.P. Jorn. But a lot of these guys aren't. And some, like even F.P. Jorn, sold, what was it, 20%, I think, of his company to Chanel. And if something happens to him, I guess eventually Chanel would somehow take over and maintain the everything that's great about it. You know, there are all kinds of things like that that are going on, and I've seen the kinds of things that Marco Lang has built. Take a look at um, Lang and Heim. All right, look at the watches there, but more importantly, look how many different calibers there are. Uh, CJ, this is in answer to your question. You can look at them and you can see how different they all are. And the most of these big companies, they'll have, you know, like Breitling finally has a movement that they called their own. And, good for them. I'm glad they did. And but before then, they were sort of going through all of these different versions of ETAs, and I- where you see one guy making all of these different movements, whereas these big companies are struggling to have one movement, then you get end up with a lot of respect for them. The path that some of these guys have taken is really very interesting. Okay. All right. So those, basically, what we're looking at is to put something together that's really good doesn't mean that it's always done by one company. Rather, if you took the best movement maker, the best case maker, the best dial maker, the best hands maker, instead of saying, well, we can do it all ourselves, I would find that much more advantageous. And then when you look at some of these good watch companies, that's what you find. You find, in fact, that they do have it. And the concept of outsourcing is, well, you take FP Jorn, for example. Damn, trying to think of the name of he has his own case making sub company. Okay, I call it a sub company. All they do is make cases. They're located in, I think, in right next. There's this building in this little town, or forgot the name of the town in Geneva, where let me see. I think there's sort of like a suburb of Geneva called uh, Meyrin, 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 and they have Agenor is there, the Bauteliers, there's something or other in this building that they share with Vacheron Constantin. I have no idea why they, not too long ago, they opened up a building and half of it was for F.P. Jorn's case making, and the other half was for FP for Vacheron Constantin doing. I don't know what they're doing in there, but they have some kind of specialization. Now the main building, the works for FP Journe is right down in downtown Geneva, right in the middle of town almost. So, and then they have the sort of this other place outside of town. Now, uh, there's so they go there for their cases, and is saying so. FP Journe says, "Okay, I'm going to design a case, and this is what I want." You can do the same thing. You can hire a designer and go to another case maker, or even FP Journe's case maker, and say, "Hey, I want a case just like this." Now, the if you own the case making companies, you could probably get a little better service on a better time scene. But what's the difference? I mean, whether it's if they're making good cases, what why insist that they must, be part of the same thing? Seiko do so much of their manufacturing in-house, and so many people forget that. But we have someone to remind us, Graham. Yeah, no, there's the thing. Seiko is Seiko does so many things that are incredibly high quality, and but and I think that they've worked out a way to do it so that their watches are very high quality and very affordable, and and they do have a big following, and this is for purely mechanical watches. Of course, I like the Seiko 5, but that's another story. Um, no, I think is that we may be whining about the wrong thing, okay? And part of what we're whining about is because we don't get the truth up front. If a company says, "Well, we make everything in house," well, what is? Come on, you make a little gear that comes from a little gear making shop where they do nothing but make gears, and they do a very good job of it. But you're saying, "Oh no, we don't even want to talk about it." That's this. I suppose what bothers me more than anything else. If you look at a car company or anything else, they got parts made by all kinds of different other. I don't know. They call them subcontractors, I guess. Uh, if something is specializes in doing something well, why would you want to have to own it for yourself? Um, in such a way that you'd have to then start all over again. Let me give you another way of approaching this. I think the vertical organization that this Sandoz family foundation has really makes a lot of sense because a lot of the companies that are part of this vertical organization are ones that existed and they bought them. Pascal Raffi in starting Beauvais 1822, which was sort of the revived Beauvais, and that was, I don't know, right around the beginning of the 21st century, 2010, maybe something like that. Anyway, what he did, he bought, there were a bunch of other little companies making movements and stuff. He put them all together in one that's called Demier, and Demier is part of Beauvais. So there's Beauvais 1822 making the watches using the Beauvais own Demier movements. They call this Demier 17 something or other, I think. So, you know, does it really matter? So maybe Demier isn't making I mean, they have, let's say, more capacity than is being filled. And so somebody from some other watch company says, "Hey, we're a little short on this. Could we buy some of these from you?" I don't know whether they do it or not, but they could. And to me, if they're making something that's good, why why should we worry about it as collectors? If they're not telling, if they're intentionally not telling the truth, or let's say full disclosure, and we find out about it, then that's, I think, where we feel like, oh, we're getting screwed, even though we may not be. Okay, let's see. Hi, Vincent. How you doing, man? Um, okay, high horology is expensive to have longevity. The economics have to work. Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's why there's so many kinds of things. I suppose to some extent the watch buyers may look like children, especially collectors like us, because like we're out there whining and worrying and about all of the perhaps the wrong things. And the focus on quality is important, but by the same token, I do think I would like to see the watchmakers have the same kind of integrity. Say, hey, we got our hairspring from Alto Capa, we got our cases from uh, let's say Wooten, Lannon, and Caton, or somebody, or something like that. But you rarely have that, and it's sort of like they don't say anything. They say, "Well, here's our watch. This is a Acme watch, and Acme makes all of their own stuff. They make their own stories." Um, J. Shapiro, RJM, Bradley Taylor are top of the North American watchmakers. Any thoughts on their work for us collectors? What does Shapiro do? Okay. Shapiro learned how to use a Rose engine for doing guilloche. He does a good job on it. Okay, real good job. He buys a UW. What is it? UDW or UWD 33.1 movement. All right, from Lang and Hine. That was designed by Marco Lang. Very good movement. You're paying around 4,000 euro for a watch movement. You can probably get a pretty good movement. Okay, so what do you have by him? You've got one of the. He has these hands he makes that I'm not crazy about. He's learning. He wants to learn how to be a watchmaker. Okay, fine. Um, but he charges 30,000 bucks for the thing. To me, what I would rather do, I could go find, for a whole lot less than that, come up with something. And all right, so maybe I pass on the guilloche, but I don't want to pay, 30,000 bucks or something like that. When I could get, here's what I could get for that. I could get the one of the few Patek Philippe's that I like that doesn't have silicon in it, and that's the new Calatrava with the dual barrels in parallel. And that's a very complex kind of thing. Now Shapiro can't even begin to do anything like that as far as watchmaking is concerned. What he does guilloche, and he does a good job of it. So that's my thought on that, CJ. Uh, I know he expects a lot of praise from everyone. Uh, for those prices, no, I don't think not for me anyway. Some other people, if they're happy with it, so what? Yeah. Didn't you just say that? Maybe not. For me, a big part of high horology is creating a tool that doesn't make stupid mistakes like interrupting or covering a complication scale by another, having settings overwrite each other. That's interesting, Simon. I could go with that. CJ, by the way, too, I don't want to come down as the sort of the spoiler on Shapiro's thing. But it is what it is, so to speak. And when you start getting into that kind of money, you're getting into something that you better have something more than that. Hey, John, frying pan time. Uh-oh. Yeah, I'll get in trouble. Okay, guys, listen, this was something I think um there's some of the kinds of involvements that we can do if we can't afford a FP Journe like Mark can. Mark and Tim got new ones. Um, there are other kinds of things I think are important to take a look at, and other things, and it's really important for us to understand what that is. And so so we can get something that we know what's going on in the watch and whether it's good or bad, and also whether it's worth the money we're paying for it. Okay, guys, take care. And what was don't take any wooden gears. We'll see you.